r/nosleep. Posted by u/Santiagodelmar. The Fifth Rule of Babysitting. Part 2. It's been 5 days since I last set foot in a room that shouldn't exist. 5 days since the delays had last asked me to babysit at their accursed estate. For those 5 days, dread shadowed me, a deep anxiety of being exposed. I had violated their most important rule, so the relief that flooded me when I was called to work today was immense. When I arrived at the delay manor, I was greeted with little fanfare. Veronica's familiar scrutiny gave nothing away. As soon as she and Thom left, I set my plan in motion. I pulled out a small box I had stuffed in my backpack and held it out, listening for any response. I went throughout the house, holding the box in front of me, repeating this in every room, hoping to elicit a response. The kids followed me, occasionally asking what I was doing. I sat down, mentally exhausted after nothing had come to fruition, and finally acknowledged the delay children. The phantom rooms were the only things on my mind as I spent the next few hours performing tedious tasks. It wasn't until after the sun started setting when I heard a panicked squeak come from the box. I rose to attention and listened for any familiar sounds. "What was that?" asked Tyler. I shushed him as I finally heard it, the creaking and splintering of wood, the sound of a new door forcing itself into existence. I ran towards the noise as the squeaks morphed into short shrieks. The children followed after me, barraging me with a series of questions. When I was in a corridor in the third room, I opened the box and pulled out the pet store mouse I had bought and held it by its tail. I dangled the now wailing thing as I made strides towards the area that elicited the most fear from it. I stopped in front of a narrow corridor that had formed near the corner of a wall. It stretched into an area that should have been a spatial impossibility. By all accounts, the corridor went beyond the outermost walls of the house and would have to be suspended in midair, and yet at its end was a sleek wooden door, intricate patterns decorating its borders. I dropped the now hysterical mouse and it scurried away, running past a screaming Jocelyn and stunned Tyler. "Cindy, what's going on?" asked Jocelyn. When I turned to face them, their faces contorted in fear at the sight of the now exposed passage and door. From behind them, Amber stepped out and made her way to my side and peered at the door curiously. "Have you ever gone inside?" I asked the quiet girl. She shook her head but gave me a look that said that she wanted to. She moved closer to the door and ran a hand along the polished surface. I reached out and placed a hand on the doorknob, ignoring the sharp sting of rising anxiety. Jocelyn and Tyler pleaded with me not to open it, but I had to know. I tugged the door open slowly, Tyler and Jocelyn flinching as I did. Inside was a room completely different than the one I had been inside of a few days prior. Now it led to some kind of red brick-lined interior. Winding paths snaked out in every direction, some curved upwards towards the walls and an unseen ceiling. "What is that?" Jocelyn asked. "I don't know, want to find out?" Tyler's eyes lit up, a sense of adventure blossoming inside the boy. Amber was already moving closer to the threshold. Jocelyn was the last one to join. Her hesitance was betrayed by a step. The promise that this would never make it to their parents' ears was made without a single word being spoken. The inside of the room was dark and dusty, a strange unease hung in the air, so thick it was nearly palpable. I propped the entrance door open with a chair. Should I see the dark centipede creature from my last visit, I would be able to escape quickly with the children. Walking deeper into the room, I saw that it was illuminated by the dim glow of overhead chandeliers. They were bound together in an intricate web of tarnished silver chains. They made up a giant suspended mass, an artificial sun long dead. The dim light it gave off did little to illuminate the space directly beneath it. The rest of the room was bathed in darkness. I pulled out a flashlight from my backpack and shone it around. The room was big enough that the light didn't hit any of the other 3 walls and instead dissipated in the empty space. We moved as a group on one of the paths until it transitioned into a stairway twisting up into an angle that should have been impossible to trek. Amber was the one to run up it. She slipped away from my grasp and ascended. I yelled after her, but as she climbed up a staircase that spiraled upside down, I was stunned into silence. Somehow, Amber was standing upright on an inverted staircase, ignoring the laws of gravity that should have sent plummeting back down. I extended my arms up towards her as she was now above our heads. "How is she doing that?" asked Jocelyn. "I don't know," I answered. Tyler gawked at me as I grabbed the quiet girl and pulled her back down. There was a resistance like a force binding her to the steps. With a tug, she broke free and she fell into my arms. I turned around to look at the door leading back to the delay manor, the promise of normality filtering in as light, and decided that it was time to leave. I grabbed hold of Jocelyn with my free hand and held Amber in the other. "Follow me," was all I said to Tyler. No one protested as I reached the door and ushered the children through. I turned back to look into the strange world contained within the phantom room. From a corner void of light, a pair of iridescent white eyes stared back at me. They moved towards me in a jerking motion as if walking on withered and unstable legs. As it stood at the edge of the chandelier's dim spotlight, I saw that it was a small, black, impish creature, the size and shape of amber. Its eyes now seemed more like eye spots, intended to ward off predators instead of functioning as ocular organs. Its head cocked as if it were observing us, and as it took another step closer, I slammed the door shut. I said nothing to the children, and instead we spent the rest of the day without mentioning what we had just done. It was late afternoon, evening fast approaching, when I finally broke the silence that had fallen between us. "Is there anything more that you can tell me about?" I asked. "No, not much. I don't think Mom's ever went inside one," Tyler answered. "What about Thom?" "No, Dad's never really even talked about them." "I'm sure he knows, I mean he's the one that had the house built," cut in Jocelyn. "Has anything ever come out of them? Have you ever heard anything from the other side?" "No, just the creaking when they show up, but never anything after," answered Jocelyn. "Don't tell your parents about today, and stay away from the doors. I think they're dangerous." The two older children both nodded in agreement. Amber was quiet as usual, but through her body language, she communicated an eagerness. A cool coastal breeze tickled exposed skin. The creamy orange rays of a setting sun did little to warm me. I shivered, not because of the encroaching cold, but instead, the goosebumps forming on my skin were brought on by thoughts of the phantom rooms. It wasn't until the sun dipped behind cresting ocean waves when I brought the children in. An hour later they were in bed, falling asleep with little complaint. I wandered over to Thom's office. Standing in front of the door, I wondered if it was worth intruding. I briefly considered searching through Veronica's office to see if I could find anything revealing a hidden truth about the insanity contained within these walls. But a different force was tugging me towards Thom's working space. I stepped into the cluttered office and searched through unorganized files and books. Nothing drew my interest until I found a photo album buried in a stack of papers. I quickly skimmed through it. I saw pictures of Tyler as a smiling mischievous baby, of a fussy Jocelyn and narrowly stone-faced newborn Amber. I saw a photo of Veronica on her wedding day, a gorgeous white dress wrapped around the once defined curvature of her body. She wore a smile so faint it was nearly imperceptible. The plastic film over the photo crinkled under the force of my grip, and I forced myself to move on. The photo of a younger Thom cradling a baby Tyler caused my heart to skip a beat. A sharp, stubble-joined stained baby blue was all it took. My free hand had subconsciously found its way to my pants zipper, and I anxiously fidgeted with it. I remembered the night he had done the same, pressed up against me, his warmth freezing me in place, and through the intensity of our breaths, we communicated a shared desire. How long ago since we had last indulged it? A little under a year. When he had first asked me about replacing his nanny, all I could think about was those shitty books marketed to suburban moms. The ones you find in grocery stores, half-naked men plastered on the covers and big bolded words like taboo and forbidden as selling books. I'd thought I would be living out a fantasy like the ones described in those books. How foolish. I had barely seen Thom since I started here, and the times I had, he didn't have that lustful gaze he had bore into me just a year prior. But now, seeing his face almost a decade younger, I could almost feel his heat, his breath, his touch. My fingertips were running along the hem of my jeans, a few dipping past when I heard that all too familiar sound. The infernal splinter of wood. "God damn it!" I hissed. Flushed with a different kind of heat, I stormed towards the sound. Just the hell was going on in this house? I decided then and there that I would get to the bottom of it, know what role everyone was playing, and if Veronica was behind it, I would ruin her. I hated her, and so did Thom. He had told enough times during those sweaty, restless nights how out of love he was with her. Maybe, if I could just get her out the picture, Thom would look at me the way he used to. I could stay here in her place just as soon as this shit settled down. I would love to be the one to wipe that smug bitch look off her face. I found the door to the ever-changing 13th room in a cellar beneath the first floor. I normally would hesitate going down into it, but in the spur of the moment I flung the ebony wood door open without a second thought. The inside was humid this time, the scent of concrete and tar emanated from it. Still, I was unaffected as I ran inside, flashlight out, and scanning the area ahead. The door had opened into a dark urban landscape, cracked concrete and roads as far as the eye could see. I guessed it was night, though no moon or stars were visible. Battered street lights were spread in seemingly random intervals, and very few of them actually functioned. Even then, all they gave off was a weak ambient glow. What the hell? I ran farther down the street, trying to find anything of note, but it was also disorienting. Streets branched out in wild zigzagging patterns and often intersected, causing multiple buildings to fuse together into tall misshapen sentinels. There was no sign of human life here, no cars, no shoes dangling from electrical wire. None of the stores weren't even marked with any identifiers. I turned around and decided to walk back, the glow of a door still in the distance. Taking my first step towards it, I felt a searing pain jolt through me, originating from my right shoulder. I panicked and grabbed onto something slimy and caustic. It wiggled in my hands and left a burning sensation. I tossed it to the ground and shone my light on it. I was greeted by a fat, dark purple slug. It writhed towards me as I heard the wet squelch of something drop from the sky and land inches from my foot. I dove under an awning as I heard more of those wet plops. I shone my flashlight around to reveal more of the slugs, now falling from the sky. A few burned through the plastic above and splattered around me. I started sprinting towards the door, trying to avoid the rain of toxic slugs. I peeked behind me to see that I was being pursued by some giant black cloud that hung low in the sky. It had to be the one producing the slugs. Thick wisps of black vapor curled and engulfed streetlights as it moved towards me. A giant iridescent green eye bloomed from its center and set its gaze on me. It picked up speed as its slug drizzle turned into a downpour, the corrosive rain nipping at my heels. I felt 2 more red-hot drops land on my neck and ankle respectively before I flung myself out of the door in one last desperate attempt to outpace the black cloud. I rolled into an upright position and pivoted to slam the door shut before it could pour into the house and consume us all. The sound of the door echoed throughout the house. I barely heard it over the thundering of my own heart. My chest ached with exhaustion and my skin was left with a sharp searing pain where the slugs had landed and left chemical burns. I searched around quickly to make sure I hadn't brought any into this world by accident. I let myself collapse after finding none. I spent the rest of the night treating my injuries and trying to calm my nerves. To hell with the house, whatever the rooms were, they always contained horrors. There was no denying it now, an evil lurked here, built into the very foundations of the house. Somehow this house had become linked to the malice of another world or worlds. I decided then and there that I would wipe my hands clean of this. I sat around in ill-contained unease waiting for the delays to arrive. When they finally did, I tried to leave as quickly as possible, planning to quit later over text. But Thom caught me by the wrist. I tried twisting away from him but he held firm. "Is something wrong? You look scared half to death." "It's nothing, I just want to get home. I need to work on a project that's due soon," I lied. "Okay, but anything's wrong, just know I'm here if you need to talk." Thom said it in as calm a voice possible, but his eyes were frenzied. What his eyes said were, "Keep your hysteria to a minimum, I don't want my wife knowing that I fucked a girl almost 20 years younger than me." Typical, covering his own ass, I let him know with my glare that I would keep our dirty secret between us. My eyes shifted behind him to meet Veronica's indifference. I broke away and turned to leave, wondering how much she really knew about Thom and me and about the house. Though she gave nothing away, I had a gut-wrenching feeling that she knew on some level the sins committed around and against her. Maybe she knew from the start what I had done, knew about Thom, breaking the 5th rule, about so much more than she let on. I don't really have anyone else to blame for that but myself, and Thom. He was the one that had spoken so sweetly to me, postured himself in the most appealing of ways. The creep had waited until I was just old enough to make his move. How long and how many times had he played his games? I wonder how long until we face the consequences of what we did, but regardless, I don't plan on letting Veronica have the last laugh. I'll take her down with me if I have to. A dark thought emerged from within me at that moment. If I could have eliminated Veronica by now, I would have. I wondered if she was the one to have set this all up as some twisted, cruel form of punishment. Would this end when I was gone for good? Did I even have the strength or will to give up? I hate to admit it, but I still ache for him. I ran home sobbing. I had stopped by the time I was inside but had begun crying again as I lay in my bed. I cried for so much, for the sins I committed, for the father I lost, for the pity I had wallowed in. I cried because I knew that this wasn't the end. Somehow I knew that I would be dragged back into the delay estate, back into the strange worlds within the 13th room. I feared that if it calls once more, through the timber of shattering wood, I just might answer its call.